This wasn't just a clash of fleets, it was a collision of philosophies. The Japanese masterpiece, hand-fitted, elite, and precise, versus the American tolerance, a logistical machine that viewed war as a problem of plumbing and arithmetic. From the gold nib of a Parker 51 pen to the bitter scent of burnt Navy coffee, the attack on Pearl Harbor didn't just sink battleships. It erased the word neutral from the American dictionary and triggered an industrial explosion that would rewrite the 20th century. The sun is a pale, buttery disk hanging over the Koolau Range. It is a soft morning. The air smells of damp earth, salt spray, and the heavy, cloying sweetness of overripe pineapples from the nearby plantations. On the deck of the USS West Virginia, a sailor named Miller is thinking about breakfast. He can hear the distant clatter of ceramic plates from the galley. It's a Sunday. The rhythm of the bass is slow, drowsy, and safe. Then comes the sound. It isn't a roar yet. It's a vibration. A low, rhythmic thrumming that starts in the soles of your feet and moves up to your teeth. It sounds like a swarm of angry hornets. Hundreds of them. Miller looks up. He squints against the glare. The silhouettes are wrong. They are fixed-gear planes, diving out of the clouds with the sun at their backs. The first explosion isn't a bang. It's a physical slap of hot air that smells suddenly, sharply, of burnt toast and fuel oil. The piece is gone. It didn't fade. It was shredded. For 2 decades, the United States had been a giant trying to sleep through a thunderstorm. The Great War was supposed to be the end of it, a brutal lesson that the old world's blood feuds were not worth American lives. We pulled the blankets over our heads. We built cars, we listened to jazz, and we pretended the oceans were walls instead of highways. But in Tokyo, the view was different. To the Imperial Japanese Navy, the Pacific was a chessboard where the squares were shrinking. They saw a world of shrinking resources and expanding ambitions. They didn't just want a victory, they wanted a knockout blow. They believed that if they could break the American spirit in a single morning, the soft Westerners would sue for peace. They were wrong. They didn't just wake a giant. They triggered a factory. The attack on Pearl Harbor changed the world not because of the ship sunk, but because it erased the word neutral from the American dictionary. Before the smoke cleared over Ford Island, the internal debate between isolationism and intervention was over. It died with the 2,403 men who never saw the Monday morning sun. There is a fundamental misunderstanding about the Japanese plan. Admiral Yamamoto and his staff were masters of the decisive battle. They viewed war as a duel between samurai, a test of spirit, training, and the sharpest blade. The Mitsubishi A6M0 was that blade. It was a masterpiece of engineering. It was light, fast, and agile. To build one, it took thousands of man-hours of skilled hand-fitting. Each plane was almost a piece of jewelry. The Japanese pilots were the elite of the elite, men who had spent years in the cockpit. They arrived at Pearl Harbor as the finest precision instrument of war the world had ever seen. But across the ocean, in places like Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Oakland, a different philosophy was simmering. The Americans didn't think in terms of masterpieces. They thought in terms of tolerances. While the Japanese were hand-polishing engine cowlings, American engineers were figuring out how to make 10,000 engines that were good enough to be bolted onto a frame by a teenager who had been milking cows 3 weeks prior. The Axis saw war as a theater of glory. The Allies, led by the American logistical machine, saw war as a problem of plumbing and arithmetic. The Japanese hit the ships. They missed the oil tanks. They missed the repair shops. They left the tools intact. That was their first, and perhaps most fatal, oversight. In the pocket of an officer on the USS Nevada, tucked next to his heart, is a Parker 51. It had been released just that year. Marketed as the world's most wanted pen, it was a sleek, hooded piece of lucite and gold. It was designed to look like a fighter plane. It was an object of the new world, modern, industrial, and precise. On December 6th, that pen was used to write love letters and grocery lists. It was used to sign routine weekend liberty passes. It was a tool of a peaceful bureaucracy. On December 8th, that same pen, and millions like it, would begin signing the requisitions for 10 million tons of steel. It would sign the enlistment papers of boys who had never traveled further than their county line. The Parker 51 is our recurring ghost. It is the bridge between the civilian world and the military machine. It represents the ink that would eventually sign the surrender documents on the deck of the Missouri, but for now, it is simply a weight in a pocket, cold against a man's chest as he runs for a machine gun. In the moments before the first torpedo hit the Oklahoma, the air below decks was thick with the smell of Navy coffee, bitter, burnt, and strong enough to peel paint. There were stacks of white ceramic mugs, thick-walled and heavy. When the ship rolled, those mugs didn't just break, they became shrapnel. After the blast, for the men trapped in the dark as the water rose, the last thing many smelled wasn't the sea. It was the scent of spilled coffee grounds and the metallic tang of canned peaches from the shattered mess stores. We remember the fire in the sky, but for the man in the engine room, history felt like the slick, oily grime of a floor that used to be level. The Japanese attack was a miracle of timing. For 2 hours, they owned the sky. They came in waves, like a tide. The first wave was for the big game, the battleships. The second wave was for the infrastructure, the airfields at Hickam and Wheeler. The Arizona went first. A 1,760-pound armor-piercing bomb pierced her deck near the number 2 turret. It ignited the forward powder magazine. The ship didn't just burn, it breathed out. A column of fire roared 500 feet into the air. The line held, but only just. Men on the ground didn't have time for grand strategy. They fought with what they had. They fired Springfield rifles at diving bombers. They used hand-cranked cranes to clear debris. There is a story of a cook named Doris Miller. He wasn't trained for the guns. He wasn't even supposed to be on deck. But when the world ended, he stepped up to a .50 caliber Browning. He had never been taught how to use it. He gripped the handles and he fired until the barrels were hot enough to blister his palms. He didn't see a Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. He saw a plane with a red circle on the wing trying to kill his friends. He pulled the trigger. Back in Tokyo, the reports were jubilant. Mission accomplished. The American Pacific Fleet was at the bottom of the harbor. But look at the ledgers. The Japanese had sunk battleships, the heavy, ornate symbols of 19th century power. But they hadn't hit a single American aircraft carrier. The carriers were at sea, ghosts in the mist. More importantly, the Japanese didn't understand the American speed. In 1941, the U.S. was producing about 3,000 planes a year. By 1944, that number would be 96,000. Think about that jump. It isn't just growth. It's an explosion. The Japanese built their planes in ateliers, workshops. The Americans built theirs on assembly lines. We applied the logic of the Ford Model T to the B-17 Flying Fortress. Across the ocean, a different story was unfolding. In the months after Pearl Harbor, the American consumer economy simply stopped. One day you could buy a toaster or a new Buick. The next day, those factories were making fuses and tank treads. The Parker 51 was now signing orders for the Liberty ship. These were ugly, boxy cargo vessels. They weren't built to last decades. They were built to be launched faster than the U-boats could sink them. In a shipyard in California, they built a ship, the Robert E. Peary, in 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. That is the sound of a country winning a war. It isn't a trumpet blast. It's the rhythmic, relentless thud of a hydraulic press. In the pocket of a Marine named Elias, stationed at the Ava mooring mast field, there is a letter. It's from his mother in Indiana. It's soggy now. It's stained with a mixture of seawater and the red Hawaiian dirt. She writes about the harvest. She mentions that the neighbor's dog had puppies. She asks if he needs more wool socks. Elias reads it while sitting in a trench he dug with a mess kit spoon. The letter smells of his mother's kitchen, vanilla and old paper, but his hands smell of cordite. The contrast is the soul of the war. These weren't warriors in the ancient sense. They were clerks, farmers, and soda jerks who were suddenly tasked with holding the line against a professional military machine. They held it with soggy letters in their pockets. 5,000 miles away, in a dark room in London, Winston Churchill heard the news. He didn't weep for the dead. He didn't tremble at the Japanese might. He lit a cigar. He knew. He knew that from this moment on, the war was won. He knew that the United States was a saturated sponge of industrial potential, and the Japanese had just squeezed it. The British had been fighting alone, their backs against the wall, watching the Luftwaffe turn their cities into rubble. Now, they had a partner with an infinite checkbook and a factory floor that stretched from sea to shining sea. The special relationship wasn't born from diplomacy. It was born from the smoke of the Arizona. Across the Atlantic, the American public, once fiercely divided, became a single, jagged blade. The America First committees vanished overnight. The mothers who had vowed their sons would never go to war were suddenly at the kitchen table, packing grease into tins to be recycled for explosives. The Parker 51 is on a desk in the Oval Office now. President Roosevelt is preparing his speech, a date which will live in infamy. He doesn't use the pen to write a declaration of revenge. He writes a declaration of war. There is a difference. Revenge is emotional. War is a process. The pen moves across the paper with a scratchy, determined sound. The ink is black. It's permanent. This pen will see the mobilization of 16 million Americans. It will sign the orders for the Manhattan Project. It will sign the GI Bill. But today, it is just an instrument of record. It records the names of the missing. It records the coordinates of the counterstrike. The Japanese thought they were destroying the American Pacific. In reality, they were just providing the ink for the next chapter of the American century. By the evening of December 7th, the fires were still burning. A sailor on the docks is handed a Hershey's bar by a Red Cross volunteer. The wrapper is silver and brown. It's slightly melted from the heat of the nearby fires. To the sailor, who has spent the last 8 hours pulling bodies from the oily water, that chocolate doesn't taste like a treat. It tastes like the world he used to live in. It's grainy, sweet, and familiar. It's the taste of a Pennsylvania factory. It's a reminder that while the ships are broken, the supply line is still open, eats it in 2 bites. His hands leave black, oily fingerprints on the silver foil. He keeps the foil in his pocket. He doesn't know why. Maybe he just needs to hold on to something that wasn't made for killing. The sun sets over Oahu. The sky is a bruised purple, streaked with a black smoke that refuses to dissipate. The harbor is quiet now, except for the hissing of extinguished fires and the distant, haunting sound of taps being played over and over again at different parts of the base. The cost is tallied in small things. A pair of spectacles left on a nightstand. A half-finished book on a bunk that is now underwater. A Parker 51 pen, lost in the silt of the harbor floor, its gold nib buried in the mud. We often talk about the sleeping giant. But a giant is a monster. America wasn't a monster. It was a community. It was a collection of grocery stores, high school gyms, and machine shops. On December 7th, the community was forced to become an empire. The men who died that morning didn't die for a grand geopolitical strategy. They died in their sleep, or they died with a wrench in their hand, or they died trying to save a friend. History is written with the big pens, the Parkers and the Montblancs, but it is lived by the men who smell of burnt toast and Navy coffee. As the stars come out over the Pacific, the tide begins to come in. It washes over the wreckage. It hides the scars. But the ledger is open. The first entry has been made, and the ink is still wet.